Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Total War Warhammer 2, talking a little bit about the DLC now that the Vampire Coast one has come out. So this is a faction that I probably won't be playing too much of, on all honesty. The bigger thing for me, actually, that came out in this is that they added the bloodlines for the vampire count, so if I want to, I can finally play as the Lamians. Not that they actually make them, like, that interesting to play as. They're pretty similar to generic in most respects there, and it doesn't change up the roster at all, which is a bit unfortunate. I'm trying to actually see if they got the Silver Peak clan of undead here. That would definitely make them a little bit more interesting as far as that goes, and it does not look as they do. That's pretty much to be expected, though. That would be a lot more work, I think, than they would be willing to put in right now. But in any event, yeah, Vampire Coast. It's a faction that I think's got a lot of fun and interesting things. I will be pretty forthright, though, with my overall assessment in that I think they're not that strong a faction. I think they've got a lot of interesting elements to their faction that combined together can be some pretty wild card and interesting strategies put to the table. But I don't necessarily know that I think that they're a great faction right out of the gate there. So anyway, let's start off by talking about their heroes. RNS Assault Spite. I'm not going to go too much into detail with their specific abilities. You've got some pretty okay dueling abilities that you can activate, but you're looking at a relatively weak Legendary Lord. Armor being very low, you sort of want to probably compensate that with the Rotting Promethean, which does at least give you some armor. Otherwise, you're looking at a character that's pretty squishy, probably going to die a little bit too quickly, even with their abilities. Just take this one if you need a really cheap Legendary Lord. There are some unique abilities there, and especially powerful is the Kraken's Blade, plus 5 melee attack, and plus 8 bonus versus large in a large area around you. This can make it so that you can take out large monsters without having to really rely on specialists for that, so I think that that's a pretty good sort of ability there. Next up, you got Luther Harkon. This guy's got some pretty decent abilities for specifically hunting down and killing mages. His stat line, and especially if you put him on Terrorgeist, he's capable of doing okay against someone like, say, Malekith or Archaon the Everchosen. I think he would lose in melee combat against them, but he's not only laying the smackdown in melee combat, but he's also disrupting their spellcasting abilities, which are an important part of those characters' abilities. Pretty decent other things going on here as well. Power Siphon being pretty okay. And Slan Gold, again, another good anti-caster item there. I don't think that you can only take him against casters. I think that he's good in a lot of situations, but that's when he's going to really be excelling there, is when he's shutting down people who use abilities or spells a lot. Next up, you got Silostra Direfin. This is their caster lord using the Lore of Deeps. This is the unique magic for these guys. It's got some pretty good spells in there. In particular, I like the Denizens of the Deep. There summons a unit of very, very powerful tanky things. Fog of the Damned, quite powerful if Overcast there, plus or minus 44 on Overcast for melee attack and a radius for 35 seconds. That's pretty big. Could really swing a battle there. They got a couple decent looking breath and wind type spells there. Kraken's Ball I don't think is very good, and I don't think that the Spiteful Shot is necessarily all that good either. For caster, she is notable in that she has physical resistance 75%. She's an ethereal leader there. You can remove the etherealness, but gain a huge amount of armor if you feel like you want to by getting the Rotting Leviathan. This is a way to sort of swap the way in which this character is tanky, because this character is quite tanky with that 75% physical resistance, but if you get hit by anything that's magical, you're going to suddenly just get completely wrecked because you've got no armor and you've got very, very little hit points, very little melee defense, so extremely easy to kill against anyone who's got a magic attack. Once you're on the Rotting Leviathan, you lose pretty much all of your physical resistance, but you're suddenly easy to hit with literally anything on the field there, so you go from one extreme to the other. Generic sort of castery type ability for magic items there, for power recharge rate and minus 10 ability recharge, so you can spam spells out really quickly with this character. Might look like you got a crap ton of different vampires here. These are all actually fairly generic. You got the polearm variant and you got the pistol variant, and then for each of those you've got the different lores of magic: lore of vampires, lore of death, and lore of the deep. They've all got sort of similar respectable stat lines, but nothing too spectacular in any of those cases. The pistol ones are a little bit better in melee combat against most things, but the ones with polearms, of course, have that bonus versus large, and of course also have bonus armor penetrating damage. The generics, I think, are pretty okay, but they're not the ones that you necessarily go to if you want to save money. Lastly is Count Noctilus. This guy is a caster lord that happens to be quite tanky, quite good in melee combat. He's actually better in most respects than a fleet admiral with the polearm. So if you were going to go for one of these guys, I think that go with this guy instead. He's just got better statistics. Now, his mount option is the Necrofex Colossus for 700 points, which is pretty inexpensive considering it adds a ton of extra hit points to him. It does reduce his armor and some of his stats, but it gives him an extra ranged attack there, which is literally a cannon that is strapped to the Necrofex Colossus's arm. So this does give you that sort of extra artillery that you might not have had in your army for an extra 700 points there, which is pretty crazy. I mean, he's also perfectly viable on foot there. Caster abilities, he's got a very, very sort of solid setup of medium level spells, basically. Wind of Death and Pit of Shades for top tier spells, but realistically you're probably going to stick with Wind of Death there. His other ability, like all his spells are pretty well chosen there. There's nothing here that I really dislike other than Pit of Shades. I don't think is particularly great right now. His item there, Captain Roth's Moondial, this allows him to do some more summoning. The only problem is that he doesn't have access to the ability to summon Rotting Prometheans, but you could add in a vampire count and just have that if you wanted to, or just really not worry about it and just use the Drowned Dead summon zombies instead there. Pretty much all in all, I think he's a pretty good character. Just all-arounder. Anyway, next up we got the heroes. Gunnery White here. This is actually kind of an insult to the Handmaidens. Very, very squishy in terms of his base stats there, but you can put him on a Rotting Promethean. It does make him a lot more durable. Makes him a little bit kind of a more obvious and easy target and not much faster, but his abilities are what makes him so good here, as well as his innate ability to shoot stuff is really, really good there. He's got the Dead Eyes, plus 10% armor-piercing missile damage, and plus 10% missile damage. Like, this is gross and is just outright better than the Handmaiden's ability, which I'm really offended by, honestly. Next up, he's got Bomb Throw. It's just a magic missile, very short range. Enchanted Ballistics, plus 60% accuracy, plus 20 reload skill on radius. This one, unfortunately, is on a timer, only 25 seconds, but it is still a very, very good ability to use. And, of course, he's also got Cackle Fruit, another sort of missile ability. For next here, you got the Morngul Haunter. This unit is, I think, supposed to be sort of an infantry assassin. I think he's supposed to be used to run down infantry characters. Not too sure about that. He is fairly squishy with only 50 armor, but he has got a fairly large amount of hit points. Good bonus versus infantry, and good charge bonus and all that. There's a lot going on with this character. I'm not necessarily sure, though, that I think that this is a great character. Like, if you're up against a man-sized, isolated enemy caster or something like that, or a hero or whatever, this guy's going to do fantastic against that kind of thing. But at the same time, if they've just got them sort of mixed in with their army, this thing's probably going to get focused down or killed just in general, or bogged down much too quickly, and probably die before it can actually do what it's supposed to do there. And if you're pitting him against, like, most infantry in the game, if you're up against, like, big, tough infantry units, he'll probably still get killed fairly fast, his melee defense and his armor being quite low. Or if he's up against, like, say, spears or something like that, he'll go down quite quickly against those sorts of things, I think. Not necessarily my favorite. Vampire Fleet Captains, these guys, despite being supposedly decent melee combatants, I would keep them out of melee under normal circumstances. Promethean, again, if you want to have that armor there. A fairly okay stat line, but nothing spectacular. Their survivability without the Promethean, and even with the Promethean, I wouldn't necessarily trust. But they're just spellcasters. They're basically just generic spellcasters with 3 different lores that you've got. That's how I would generally treat these guys and think of them as. Next up, though, into the infantry. These guys, not actually as good as I think the regular undead are in the infantry tab here. And it comes down to cost efficiency. So the zombie pirate deckhands mob is just all around better than the regular zombies. If we take a look here, the regular zombies are worse in every way, basically, except for speed. The thing is that these guys cost twice as much, and for what they're intended to use them for, what I'm probably using them for, I'd rather have 2 units of zombies as opposed to 1 unit of zombie pirate deckhands, because that's going to let me sort of really swarm the battlefield with things to block enemies and stop them from getting around the field or getting to where they want to, or helping me pin things down. And then, of course, you can sort of also summon way more zombies as well. Now, the zombie pirate deckhands being more strong does also mean that the summon version is also more strong, but still, I don't think that this is necessarily the best unit out there for what it is worth. Their stats being a little bit better in every regard doesn't really help them enough to make them a good infantry unit. They just are a slightly more deadly tar pit, and they're still a tar pit in the end. Zombie pirate deckhands with mobs with polearms there, you would probably compare these to the skeletons there. Skeletons with spears, rather. So as you can see, the skeletons, pluses or minuses, they're pretty comparable in a lot of respects there. I think that they're a pretty decent unit for what they are. Actually just a meat shield that blocks rear charges and stuff like that and stops your army from getting attacked from behind. I think that they're pretty good at that particular role, and I think that that's what you're going to probably pick up if you want to do that. Would like a slightly cheaper option if at all possible, but 400 points is perfectly cheap and reasonable for what they're probably going to be doing under most circumstances. They also do double as armor penetrating damage, which is kind of nice, but they're not going to take out any sort of heavy elite infantry, that sort of thing. Titus Scold, this is the zombie-powered deckhand mob. They've got some percentage boosts as well as a +4 to leadership. This is not really good enough to make them, in my opinion, worthwhile. It's another 150 points on a zombie unit for what I would argue is not really necessarily worth it. Sirens, these guys are the same as Karen Wraiths in many respects there, but much more defense-orientated, whereas the Karen Wraiths I'd say are a little bit more physical damage-orientated. These guys are capable of withstanding a ton of damage from things that use non-magic melee attacks, and because they've got that -9 melee attack as well as a decent melee defense stat, they're probably going to survive quite well against even things that do have melee attacks there. They're going to survive better in any event than the Karen Wraiths. I'd use these guys just as a sort of new type of bog pit to sort of slow down enemy advances or whatever in an area where I might not be able to get a lot of support, and the enemy also probably won't get a lot of support. But it would be hard to use these guys too effectively just because their stats and ability to kill things is pretty limited. Depth Guard, these guys are incredibly powerful, but they come in a small unit with low health. Now, you can fix that a little bit thanks to the hunger. While they're in melee, they're going to be constantly healing a little bit there as well. So they will stick it out a lot longer than it looks like they will, but they're not a super tanky unit. They don't have shields. They've got kind of medium armor, and they've got fairly low melee defense. So these guys are going to go down fairly quickly. What they have got is a lot of killing potential. So if they're up against the right kinds of units that they can mulch through quickly enough that they're not going to take too much damage, or where they can replenish themselves, if they're against something that tries to kill these guys slowly, these guys are going to do amazing because they'll slowly regenerate all their health there thanks to the hunger, and they'll be able to tear through their opponent really, really quickly. So good shock troop, but unfortunately 1,000 to 100 for a shock troop versus light infantry since they don't have that sort of armor piercing trait there. And their armor piercing damage is not even that great a ratio. I think that these guys are sort of going to be a bit lackluster in a lot of situations. Depth Guard with polearms, these guys have much, much lower stats, but they have got that bonus versus large. I think that for their role, they're really quite a bit too expensive. I would much, much, much rather have 3 units of zombie pirate deckhands for the particular job that these guys are supposed to be doing. You've got the Bloody Reavers Death Guard. These guys just also have access to Enrage. Gives them extra damage resistance. This could be good against certain types of elites if you're using them as sort of armor-piercing elite bashers, but I honestly don't think that they're going to cut the grade under most circumstances. Again, I think they're just too expensive. 4 units of zombie pirate deckhands for the price of one of these guys. I would rather take the 4 as a blocker, just keep them loose around the back lines and have them sort of wait to intercept cavalry or sneaky things slipping past my front line, as opposed to this one unit that's going to have a hard time shifting around, being in all those places at once. For missile infantry, this is where I think these guys are kind of actually quite good. Zombie pirate gunnery mob, these guys cost the same as a regular zombie pirate deckhand mob, and they're not actually supremely worse in many respects there. I would actually prefer taking these in some respects. Normally what you do with zombies is you run in and you sort of have them tie up an enemy in melee combat. Your opponent doesn't actually want to be in melee combat with the zombies, so if they can, they're going to probably try and get around them and get out of that potential fight there. With this unit, it's 120 people with pistols. That's actually quite a lot of potential damage. Even though their damage per shot is really quite low and they've got low range, you can sort of set this lineup in front of the enemy and just have them firing away, and your opponent is going to be forced to engage against your zombies. Same cost as regular zombies too, it's just they will crumble and die quite a bit faster from having significantly less hit points, about 2,000 less per unit, so it is going to be a bit of a trade-off there. Zombie pirate gunnery mob with bombs. I don't tend to find bombers useful in a lot of the Total War games. This might be a bit different. It's a unit of 90, which is pretty big unit size. And also, I know that the miners and the ironbreakers are quite good in this game. So if they're anything like that, I think they'll actually find a place there. Also, it only takes them 1 shot to be depleted to get that extra powder buff there, which gives them a huge bonus to damage, which means that they can start chucking bombs and dealing quite a lot of extra damage off of those things on the 2nd and 3rd volleys. And then after that, of course, you can use them as an okay meat shield. 5,220 hit points is not a small amount of hit points. Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mob, this is the one that you're really, with the handguns, this is one that you're probably going to be really using as an actual sort of gunner unit. 120 models in the unit there, decent amount of range and missile damage for armor-piercing weapons there. These guys are just your typical gunners. I think they could be easily underestimated. They have got weaknesses, yes, in skirmishing fights against other factions, but the fact that you can sort of heal them while you're doing that and bring back models while you're doing it could potentially really swing that back. And the fact that they fire 120 shots per volley instead of just like 90 or something like that with some of the other factions can really mean that these guys can do some good work there. Pretty expensive for what they are as well. 550 points for an undead zombie unit. It's pretty expensive, but they're really quite reasonable for a handgun unit. Depends on how you're looking at them. Got the Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mob with the hand cannons. These guys sort of have cannons that fire shrapnel or grape shot at close range there. I'm not too sure what I think about these guys. I honestly am not sure how you're going to make good use of them. I'd have to see more about them in particular. Deck gunners, I think that you could really use these guys in combination with things like Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mobs. But these guys have shield breaker as an ability there, minus 24 to shield parry. This could make it so that you could really focus fire down a unit. These guys start firing at them to break their shields. The other units of handgunners just sort of mow them down with their armor-piercing missiles, and you're not going to be able to defend yourselves all that well against that kind of combination there. In this unit, if it's the one that you want to pick out there, 245 range, quite good range there. Good damage on the weapon itself. I think that these guys are going to wind up being something that a lot of high-level Vampire Coast players use to some degree or another. They're a fairly fragile unit, though. Only 24 models in the unit with 2,592 hit points is very, very squishy. Black Spot, these guys have handguns and halberds, fairly sort of like Lothern Seaguard type unit. I think that it makes less sense for you to take this kind of unit in the context of the Vampire Coast as opposed to with High Elves, where it sort of makes sense to do that kind of unit. I think that in this particular case, like the fact that you're paying 800 points for this means that I'd rather have the Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mob as well as a unit of Zombie Pirate Deckhands, just as a blocker or something like that to distract from the Gunnery Mob. And then if it's cavalry, you can have the zombies distracting them while the gunnery guys shoot at the cavalry. Like that works just fine. Shadow Wraith Gunners, these guys are kind of unique. Instead of the Shield Breaker, they've got Discouraged, they've got magic attacks, they've got magic ammunition attacks, and they're another real unit. They're ghosts. So this means that they're quite squishy against magic attacks. Any magic is going to take these guys out really, really quickly. But good amount of damage, good amount of armor penetration. Like these guys could be used to really wreak some havoc against certain types of units. And more importantly, they're going to be hard to take out unless you've got access to those magic attacks. So against anyone that doesn't have those, these guys are going to be quite annoying to deal with. I don't think that I believe that they're actually better, though, than the deck gunners, just because, like, most factions do have some answer to these guys just in terms of having a magic attack, because they're going to have to. They need to be able to fight the Sirens, and more importantly, they have to have something that can hurt Silostra Direfin. Next up, you got the Monsters and Beasts, Felbats, your typical sort of Felbat unit. I think they're going to conjunction quite well with the fact that they've got a lot of air ranged units that you could sort of also take. The Felbats could be used as sort of a screen to make sure that those units don't get caught out by a dragon or something like that. Felbats, of course, will lose that fight against the dragon or whatever, but they can give you time to get away or to get a Terrorgeist into there or to let you shoot at them. Scurvy Dogs, a little bit cheaper than Dire Wolves, but they're actually better as a result of that. Like, their stats are a little bit worse. So I like these guys quite a bit there. They're going to be used as harassers, outflankers, sort of things. Not going to actually be all that good at combat, but that's to be expected. Bloated Corpse, this guy's actually a suicide bomber. Very, very interesting type of unit. What they can do is they can sort of run in there and explode, causing severe damage to himself. It actually kills himself. And he can, of course, only do this once. This does humongous damage in a very, very large radius, but you only get one guy in the unit there. I'm not too sure if I think that this guy's often going to be worth his money, but I think that he definitely could be if you get the right sort of situation where he's blowing up in the midst of a huge cluster of elite infantry. It's just contriving a situation so that happens is going to be quite difficult. Even before he explodes, though, he has got fairly decent statistics for causing damage. It's just that he's got 0 armor and only 1,206 hit points, so he will die very, very quickly. Not necessarily a great situation, and of course, if he's stuck against Chafe, he's probably not going to make his money back. Next up is the Animated Hulks. These guys are a fairly decent troll-type unit, fairly decent amount of hit points. They're low armor, low leadership. You're going to be able to kill these guys off quite quickly there, but good weapon strength, so they're going to be able to sort of sit in there, have lots of hit points, and smack things around a little bit there. Mourngulls, I don't think these guys are great for their cost there. I think they're good, and their role is kind of needed, being able to be a real infantry punisher. Mix them in with some zombies or what have you, and have that combination just run into an enemy elite unit. You're probably going to deal a lot of damage to that unit thanks to these guys. The only problem is that they're pretty expensive. 1,000 points for something that's fairly fragile. Probably going to get focused down pretty easily. Not exactly great melee attack or melee defense there. What it has got is a lot of weapon strength and a lot of bonus versus infantry and a lot of armor penetration. So very, very specialized type of unit there. I think it's going to be one that is pretty okay. It's got stock, so I guess you could use it for ambushing, but even with stock, you'd notice it from pretty far away, and it's not exactly best off when it's by itself. I really don't think it is. Rotting Prometheans, these guys are interesting, very expensive. Use the summon version, in my opinion, more often than the store-bought version. Like 1,100 points for a tanky unit is pretty expensive, especially for an undead faction. I think they're a good unit, but I don't necessarily think that you need them, just because zombies, I think, are perfectly good at bunging things up there. If you need to block something, though, and you need it to have armor, and you're not relying on hit points, you're relying on armor instead, these guys are your go-to. They've got a lot of armor, they're not too expensive, got a decent unit size, and they've got relatively decent armor penetration as well, so they can dish out some level of hurt. Good defense, which is quite nice for an ogre-sized unit. Night Terrors, these guys have way higher stats than a regular Mourngul. The only thing is they've got the Rampage special rule, so they will sort of wander off and do their own damn thing whenever you don't want them to. So that does make them a little bit dangerous to field. Other than that, though, I still don't think that these guys are great at their intended role of killing infantry. But I think that they can be very, very powerful if you get them in the right situation there. I think that the Missile Monsters and Beasts is going to be one of the things that makes these guys quite powerful. The deck droppers, the ones with the pistols here, pretty decent stat line all around there. I think that their ability to sort of fire on the move is going to make them super annoying to deal with for certain factions. I think they're going to be able to sort of dish out a lot of hurt with these kinds of units there without it being super easy to retaliate against them, but this isn't the unit I think is going to be the real saving grace for these guys. Now, if you're up against something like, say, goblins or whatever, or other undead where you can use these guys to fend off against direwolves or goblin wolf riders or stuff like that, or even to threaten war machines, these guys are going to be really great at those roles. It means that people have to dedicate units to defending those sorts of things, and preferably ranged units, actually. But I don't think these guys are the ones that are going to be really amazing for this. Bombers over here, I don't necessarily have the micro to deal with these kinds of units myself, to use these kinds of units myself, but I think they're going to end up being quite good in the hands of some players. Decent amounts of damage there. Decent ability to do something a little bit unique, I think. Next up, you got the deck droppers with handguns. I think these guys are the ones that are going to be really key to these guys. Anyone that's got like a heavy cavalry detachment is going to have to recall that heavy cavalry detachment back to their main force. They could also chip off a bunch of chaos units on the way approaching. Since they've got those armor-piercing, fairly high damage attacks there, they're going to be able to take out, for example, a key unit of Chaos Halberdier Chosen or something like that if they wanted to. I think that these guys are going to be a real good unit for this faction there. 700 points is fairly expensive though, and they're pretty squishy, so if the enemy has the ability to counter air, they need to be really, really careful. It does mean as well, though, like you're just going to see no people taking cavalry detachments eventually against these guys. All the cavalry is going to really have to stick with the rest of the army to make sure they don't get picked off by these deck droppers with handguns. Got the Salt Lord Scuttlers, the deck dropper bombers, regiments are renowned there. They've got the ability to sunder armor. I think that's going to be tricky to use that without crapping all over your own units, and since some of your units do really rely on having that 120 or 90 armor or whatever, it's going to be a little bit tricky to do this. I think that they're not necessarily going to be an easy unit to use, but I think they could be really good against things like dwarves or what have you. Next, you got the Rotting Promethean Gunnery Mob. These guys I don't think are necessarily terrible, but also not necessarily great. They're only 250 points more than the Rotting Prometheans, but they have got access to like 2 Pistoliers per monster. So it's like having 18 Pistoliers when normally you'd get like a unit with 120 of them, so that's why it's not that great. But the Rotting Prometheans themselves are pretty good, and it's going to be really hard to actually effectively counter these guys. Since they've got bonus versus large, charged with cavalry, these things will be perfectly fine with that. They've got decent melee attack and stuff like that, so they're going to just be able to hold on in melee combat anyway. Next up, you got the Lamper's Revenge which is the same as the Gunnery Mob, except Regiment's Renowned version. These guys have regen, so it's more of what they already were. Like, they're even tougher than the standard. I think these guys could be potentially okay, but they're very, very expensive there. You'd have to really have a great way to use that fairly limited missile damage to some sort of effect there. For artillery, we're looking at mortars, which is going to be quite good against a lot of factions. I think these are going to wind up being something that people use quite a bit of. You got the carronade cannon, again, just very, very stereotypical type of cannon there. A little bit less damage than some out there, but pretty good range, a little bit lower cost there. I think that people are going to definitely use these things under certain circumstances. And then you got the Queen Bess. I do not like the Queen Bess personally. It's one of those units where you get one cannon instead of three. It fires like the Hell Cannon with a very high shot that arcs quite a lot, travels very slowly. I think the problem with Queen Bess is that because it's such a slow, high shot projectile with such a huge travel time, you're often going to miss targets with it, and its big explosion and stuff like that's going to be wasted. It's too expensive for the kind of unit that's not going to hit the mark most of its shots and is really easy to dodge from an attentive player, so I just don't think the Queen Bess is really going to be that useful. Rare monsters, Necrofex Colossus. This guy has a cannon that he fires from his wrist. It is kind of ridiculous. Very, very good stat line, very good weapon damage and missile damage. I think these guys are going to be quite popular at some point in time. Hard to say if that's going to last for too long, but I do think that these guys have a lot going for them. I'm thinking that their projectile might be better than the Cygors, but not too sure if it's better than the Bone Giants. A lot of giant type units with ranged attacks nowadays. Anyway, got the Gallows Giant. This guy's got a flamethrower. The numbers on this page are lies. I do not necessarily know how how the numbers here actually work, but they're wrong. These are definitely the wrong numbers here. It has way more ammunition than 4, in a certain sense there, and its missile damage is definitely nowhere near 5,523 per volley, or even per 10 seconds, as it normally would be. I'm really not sure how they come to this calculation or what's going on there, but it does not seem to fire in the way that it was intended to, or maybe it just is that my opponent was doing something weird and it was having some sort of weird time with it. But this guy's got way more ammunition and does way less damage with his shots there. Still, despite all that, fairly good attack for what it is. I think it's mostly meant to be for clearing out lots of elite infantry or something like that, which I think it would do its job at pretty well, but it's not going to get a whole ton of shots off just because it's very, very short range for what it is. Powerful unit, though, all in all. I think it's just, I would rather have the cannon 9 times out of 10, however. Next up, you've got the Rotting Leviathan. This is a very, very durable, tanky monster. Taking one of these guys is just going to make it so that you've got a very powerful monster meat shield that's capable of rampaging through enemy lines, has to be dealt with. It's got a little bit of a gun on it, but it really does not matter that that exists there. You can just sort of ignore that. I think this is going to be one of those sort of monsters that is not really that common, just because it's not going to be able to do a ton other than just be annoying, meaning that the opposing player can sort of ignore it until they've dismantled the rest of the army, and it's a lot of points. 2,000 is a lot of your points out there. Next up, you got the Death Shriek Terrorgeist. This is actually just close to being a dragon for most other factions there. Death Shriek is being a lot like the Dragon Breath in some respects there. I think that this is going to be a fairly popular type of dragon in some respects there. Decent stat line with poison, as well as good armor piercing, as well as a decent breath attack there. Death Shriek is in some ways different from a breath attack, but I think this is all around an okay type of flying monster there if you're going for that route. So anyway, that is the entire roster. I think that they're very good at sort of summoning things. I think that they've got some good support units. I think they're going to have some trouble in that they don't have good heavy cavalry in the normal sense there. I think they're going to have some trouble just in the sense that they don't have great units for killing infantry head-to-head, and they have very, very little that can survive getting shot at. So we're going to have to see how that sort of all pans out, but in any event, let's get to the battlefield and see how things go. Okay, and we're back. So here we are. We've got my High Elf force over here, and I am playing the High Elves in this particular case, just in case you were wondering. Now, here's what my opponent's brought here. He's got the Queen Bess, which I think was a mistake. I don't think that's a particularly good weapon. I think the mortars would have been much more efficient here. In any event, he's got some more Morngulls there. He's got his Bloat Corpse there. His general is the Kylostra Direfin, and he's got the Gallows Giant as well. Loads of zombies there in addition to this. He's got lots of stuff that he's got as an ability to summon there. And I've got, in my particular case here, 3 of these units of Shadow Warriors being augmented by the Handmaiden and the Everqueen. I've got 5 units of Spearmen, and I brought along the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower as well as Alariel the Radiant. In the forest, I've hidden a unit of Dragon Princes, unit of Silverhelms. They're going to be able to help me out quite a lot in this particular battle. So the reason I don't think the Queen Bess is very good is it fires very, very high arcs, and it does have a very, very slow projectile, which means that it's quite easy to dodge. You can see as well that like they're firing at the Handmaiden over here, and I've been able to not get hit by any of these shots here. I've decided to just move my character off into the woods there. They're going to start firing at the Eagle's Claw Bolt Throwers there. Much, much easier target. It's going to be much more effective. I accidentally forgot to switch off the right type of fire there, but do manage to kill a zombie, I guess. That's not really like that matters, honestly. So I think that the Queen Bess is good for counter battery operations there. It's going to be able to deal a lot of damage really quickly to this Bolt Thrower there. Boom. It's like a third of the hit points of this thing right away there. But I'm not really that concerned about it. The Bolt Thrower is pretty cheap. Now, my opponent is rushing forward with some zombie pirates. I'm not entirely sure why he just brought the 1 unit forward, but he didn't realize I had all these Shadow Warriors in hiding there. And this is going to compel him to do some weird stuff that I don't think he probably should have been doing, but he's trying to sort of get rid of my Shadow Warriors without sort of disrupting his formation up here. He knows that if he just chases his entire army into my Shadow Warriors, I'm just going to kite him. It's not really going to help him at all. So, in any event, his unit of zombies over here is just going to get completely butchered. Silostra Direfin is going to run up here and try and get a couple spells cast on these guys, but it's not necessarily going to be super, super useful there. So, he's got the damned Knight Errants. They're going to end up hitting the Handmaiden and the Everqueen, which is going to stop them in their tracks to a certain degree there. She has got magical ammunition, so I should probably be using her attacks on that sort of thing there. But you can see these guys are already disintegrating quite badly. These guys have, zombies have finished disintegrating as well. But Silostra Direfin is coming in to try and attack my unit that's run into the woods here. What's going to happen is she's going to summon a unit of these rotting Prometheans, which is going to actually be quite good at disrupting my Shadow Warriors there. But the thing is, Shadow Warriors, pretty high defensive stats actually. They're not going to lose against these guys too badly, and since all they have to do is wait these guys out, the high defense on the rotting Prometheans doesn't really matter too much. What you really need to use these guys for is for blocking troops that are going to be quite important into a fight, as opposed to using them to disrupt ranged units. In my opinion, I think that zombies would have been much more effective here. Silostra Direfin getting completely wasted by some units of Dragon Princes here. They're able to do some good damage. The Shadow Warriors have managed to come in from behind and start hitting these rotting Prometheans and deal some pretty good damage to them. And then we start getting some shots into them from behind. I probably should have had my units off fire at will because I did not want to be firing at them. Now, she has got my unit moving slowly from that defensive ability she has, but we are able to sort of get in there and deal some damage. I run away from this bloated corpse that starts running in, and I probably should have shifted fire to it. It does end up actually running into my Dragon Princes and succeeding, but you know, that's pretty much fine. Yeah, this is kind of an interesting unit, and I should have been paying better attention to it. I did not think that was going to deal as much damage as it actually does. Anyway, another unit of these rotting Prometheans. As well, his unit of Morn Ghouls runs forward and actually gets engaged by my Fireborn. This gives him an opportunity, though, to run into the side with a bloated corpse there and explode. He just barely makes it into the side there, though. It doesn't actually deal that much damage. He starts firing after that with his Gallows Giant, and the Gallows Giant uses a flaming attack, so it's not actually dealing that much damage to my Dragon Princes, since they're practically immune to fire attacks. The Morn Ghouls here getting absolutely trashed by Fireborn, but they took a lot of damage from that bloat corpse, actually. Over here, the Rotting Prometheans now stuck in combat against Spearmen. The Spearmen are going to be able to tank the fight out until they run out of whatever. It's not going to help them that much. But in the meantime, like, I really need to start working on the Gallows Giant. I believe we've just started firing at it here. And sort of see the first indication of shots there. I'm still not entirely sure how, like, the ammunition for this thing works. Like, it says it's got 4 shots, but it clearly has more than 4 shots there. But yeah, this thing's taking a decent amount of damage from all of this nonsense, and not having exactly as great a day as it maybe should, but it has got a lot of hit points, so it can survive a lot of this damage. Handmaiden should probably be firing at Celesta again. So the reason, again, that he's not running down here is because like a lot of his units were in a situation where they were trying to protect those ranged units. Didn't want me to be able to use my skirmishers, so he was trying to run forward and disrupt them with summons and stuff like that. But his summons didn't quite do as much damage as I think he was expecting. So in any event, we finally have our general engagement here. Loads of zombies coming down here to fight, and they are a little bit tougher. They're going to give my spearmen a rough time compared to what I would normally have, but Dragon Princes and Silverhelms coming around the long flank here. So missed shots coming in against the Everqueen as well here, so not too sure about that. Getting some debuffs down against my other units. Like you can see that like literally going through the Everqueen, not hitting the Eagle and missing the hitbox there, so that's fantastic. So at this kind of range, like that fire ability is pretty useless. This guy lumbers on through, is trying to attack my Shadow Warriors for some reason with his General. General's taking big hits from the Handmaiden and the Everqueen. Like the shots that she has are pretty damaging against that kind of unit. But we're coming in with the Shadow Warriors, we're coming in with the Lariel. Missing, I think I missed like 2 or 3 shots in a row with the Handmaiden at this point in time, even though they buffed her accuracy, and she should not be missing that, but whatever. In we go with Dragon Princes into the Queen Bess here. Another unit of Spearmen coming in around the back here. They're going to end up smashing the Zombie Pirate deckhands and so on and so forth. But yeah, I've got a fairly thin line at the front here. It's not going to be able to hold out too long. Their generals now at this point sort of forced retreat, all the while meanwhile getting pecked in behind on the butt by the Everqueen, as well as the Handmaiden's arrows, doing some damage there as well. And she's down to like half health now. That arrow also like smacks into her. Shadow Warriors coming in still. So yeah, like they've got nothing that can really efficiently kill all my spearmen off, which is what they really probably need under this situation here. They do manage to take out my Silverhelms in this instance, but we got this like full strength unit of spearmen around back here. It's going to be able to do some real havoc there. Their general's down to about half health still, and we've basically cleared out their cannon, which is mostly just for combat resolution. Our bolt throwers back into the fight to a certain degree. Now here's where I think this thing is more or less excellent. Able to fire these sort of very close range blasts into my infantry is dealing tons of damage to them. So I think that this is where it really sort of shines, but before that it was kind of just stomping around and missing a lot. It's still got like full ammo basically though. Spiteful Shot upgraded. I think it's still going to miss my Everqueen quite a few shots. I remember there's a point where it does actually start hitting the Everqueen though. Like I think it's why I'm standing like right over here, basically. Another bunch of people incinerated there. He's down up to 15 kills from that. But yeah, still getting magic attacks and stuff like that thanks to the Everqueen here. Silverhelms accidentally run into a bad part of the fight there, get chased away again. Their general actually has probably about as much health as mine percent-wise. It's kind of funny. They're 3,000 hit points for them, 1,800 for me. But even so, like, it's pretty clear that I'm starting to clean up on a lot of flanks here. We've got like these zombie pirate deckhands completely gone here on the flank. So once those units are cleaned up, I'll be pretty much clean to go. Yeah, he does miss a couple shots even from this range here with his Gallows Giant, which is kind of depressing. Shadow Warriors coming back into the fight yet again here. Everqueen's been healing up a little bit, I think, so she's still at 1821 for hit points, but over here, a unit of polearms does seem to be getting bested by a unit of Shadow Warriors, although the Shadow Warriors are very tired here. Unit of Spearmen over here coming in to join the fray. I think this unit of deckhands might have been summoned. Hard to tell sometimes. But in any event. So yeah, this is me playing against the... oh yeah, that's where he gets a good hit there. I think he gets a couple more because I don't really bother moving the Everqueen all that much here. His general's being chased down by a Fireborn though, so I'm not too worried about that. And also he's got the Handmaiden beating him up there. I think he just incinerated most of his own zombie pirates there, that particular shot. But yeah, like... it's got some interesting and powerful units. He just doesn't have the core fundamental units is sort of the thing about this faction. I think they're almost like a gimmick faction in some respects. They're loads and loads and loads of gimmicky, fun types of units, but nothing solid, I think, to rely on. I think that's going to sort of hurt them as a faction quite badly. Although I think that at the same time, if you can really master their gimmicks, they're going to be quite powerful in certain respects there. So I think that don't underestimate them necessarily. I think there are going to be people who figure them out and figure out how to really effectively play them. But I think that, that without those sort of standard types of good frontline units, good value units, you're going to have a hard time, and that's sort of what these guys are lacking, is good value units to a very large extent there. Yeah, so anyway, that's pretty much the battle here. They eventually chase away my Shadow Warriors after having attacked them with 2 Zombie Pirate units. This unit of Zombie Pirates actually is also getting the best of my Spearmen here. I've always said this, like, Spearmen need a buff. They're just not good enough at what they do. But in any event, get the victory there. Let's take a quick look at the battle stats at the end here. So, looking at the units that did well, like the Bloat Corpse here, I would not undersell. It only got 7 actual kills, but those kills were Dragon Princes, and it also did a ton of damage to my unit of Dragon Princes. So even though it only got 7 kills, it also weakened the unit quite significantly. I did dump a bunch of healing on it, so that mitigated some of that, but realistically speaking, that was doing a fantastic job of what it was supposed to be doing there. Other than that, though, the Gallus Giant, 41 kills. That's not great considering what he was getting kills against. He was very annoying, and he did deal some damage to the Everqueen, but there's no way he could have finished her off with that kind of short range. Queen Bess, completely useless in this particular instance. Did seem to be very, very good for counter battery operations, though, against other artillery. I think that that's going to be something it winds up being quite good at. Morngulls here ran into the wrong neighborhood there, did nothing as a result of it. Again, I don't think these guys are a great unit, but he needed to use something else for that particular purpose. What ended up happening is my opponent was over-reliant on trying the idea of summoning to try and get rid of my Shadow Warriors, but the Shadow Warriors have good melee defense statistics, so they were able to hold through the summons because the summons didn't have enough kill potential to get rid of them, letting me sort of counterattack with my stuff and get rid of those units. And then the support units around it were not necessarily the best at what they do, or they couldn't really get into the situation where they would really, really shine. The Morngulls, for example, weren't able to do the thing that they were really designed for. The Tidus Controlled were pretty much against the things that they should be up against, but that's not really a great situation when they're also getting rear charged in the back by Dragon Princes. The Gallus Giant, I think, was spending too much time trying to shoot my general. I think should have been focusing fire on my infantry the entire time. So, just generally speaking, I think that this is a faction that's going to be interesting to see and follow. I'll see if I can find more players that are using it more viably than this. But in the meantime, my general supposition is that it's going to be a faction that's more fun to play than it is practical to play. So anyway, hope you found this video enjoyable. And of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.